At 25, a young lady never imagined a simple shift at Value Mart would lead to an invitation that would change her life forever. But on that fateful Tuesday afternoon, her small act of kindness caught the attention of the city's most influential leader, proving that sometimes the biggest dreams start with the smallest gestures. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Value Mart cast their familiar pale glow across Register 7, where Lindy McFell stood, mechanically scanning items while her mind wandered to the stack of unpaid bills waiting at home. Her father had always told her that true character shines brightest during life's darkest moments, but lately, those words felt more like a weight than wisdom. At 25, she had mastered the art of stretching every dollar, turning her modest cashier's salary into a delicate balance of rent, utilities, and the occasional cup of coffee that kept her going through long shifts. The morning rush had faded into the quiet lull of early afternoon, leaving Lindy alone with her thoughts and the steady hum of the store's aging air conditioning system. She absently adjusted her name tag, a small piece of plastic that had witnessed countless interactions over her 3 years at Value Mart. Each beep of her scanner told a story, of families planning celebrations, elderly couples sharing quiet moments, and sometimes of struggles all too familiar to her own. Through the store's wide windows, Riverside Heights sprawled before her, a modest city where dreams often took a backseat to practicality. The same city where she had grown up, watched her father work 2 jobs to support their family after her mother's passing, and learned the value of perseverance. Now standing behind her register, she carried those lessons close to her heart, even as her own dreams of going back to college seemed to drift further away with each passing month. James Hawthorne, her supervisor, often praised her ability to connect with customers, calling her the heart of Register 7. But today, that heart felt heavy. The morning's mail had brought another reminder of her mounting student loan debt from the 2 years she'd managed to complete before having to drop out, and the dental bill from last month's emergency root canal still loomed large. Her small apartment, once a symbol of independence, now felt like a reminder of dreams deferred. The worn leather wallet in her pocket contained exactly $37.15, her emergency fund that seemed to shrink more often than it grew. She'd counted it 3 times during her break, calculating how long it needed to last until her next paycheck. The numbers never quite added up the way she hoped they would, but Lindy had become an expert at making things stretch, just like her father had taught her. Yet, despite these challenges, Lindy maintained her signature warm smile. Regular customers like David Smith, who owned the hardware store down the street, would often comment on how her genuine kindness had brightened their day. She found solace in these small connections, in being able to make someone's day a little better, even if she couldn't quite figure out how to improve her own situation. "Your smile could light up this whole store," David had told her just this morning as she rang up his weekly supply of nuts and bolts. "You remind me of my late wife. She always said a kind heart was worth more than a full wallet." Those words had stayed with her, mixing with memories of her own mother's gentle wisdom about the importance of staying soft in a hard world. The gentle autumn breeze occasionally swept through the automatic doors, carrying with it the promise of change, though Lindy had long since learned to temper her expectations. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Kindness costs nothing, but its value is beyond measure. She held on to these words like a lifeline, even as she counted the days until her next paycheck, wondering if this month would be the one where everything finally fell into place. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the store's windows, Lindy watched the usual parade of customers flow through her lane. Mrs. Peterson with her weekly supply of cat food, the Thompson twins arguing over which candy bar to choose, and various faces that had become familiar over the years. Each transaction was a brief window into someone else's story, and Lindy had learned to read the subtle signs of celebration, of worry, of hope. During her lunch break, she had sat in the employee break room, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee while scrolling through online college courses on her phone's cracked screen. The community college's website mockingly displayed classes she couldn't afford, dreams just out of reach. Her father had always encouraged her to finish her education, but after his accident last year and the resulting medical bills, that path had seemed to close off entirely. The afternoon shift brought its own rhythm, the after-school rush of teenagers buying snacks, mothers picking up last-minute dinner ingredients, and the elderly couples who came in just to escape the loneliness of empty homes. Lindy knew many of their stories, carried them in her heart like precious cargo. Mr. Jenkins, who always bought flowers for his wife's grave on Thursdays. The young couple saving up for their wedding, counting every penny at her register. The high school teacher who sometimes slipped extra money to students who came up short at lunch. Little did she know that in just a few hours, an unexpected encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change her life, but would ripple through the entire community of Riverside Heights, reaching all the way to the highest office in the city. As she straightened her register area and prepared for the afternoon rush, Lindy had no way of knowing that her unwavering commitment to kindness was about to be tested in a way that would transform her from a simple cashier into something far more remarkable. The afternoon shift at Value Mart usually brought a predictable parade of customers, but today felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the way the autumn sunlight slanted through the windows, casting everything in a golden hue. Or maybe it was the lingering weight of her morning bills that made Lindy more attuned to the subtle signs of struggle in others' eyes. She'd become something of an expert at reading people's stories in the items they placed on her conveyor belt, in the way they counted their money, in the slight tremor of their hands as they reached for their wallets. "Register 7 is open," she called out warmly, maintaining her signature smile despite the growing ache in her feet. A young mother juggling a crying infant stepped into her lane, and Lindy immediately noticed the careful way she arranged her items, necessities only, grouped by priority. It was a familiar dance Lindy had seen countless times, one she'd performed herself more often than she cared to remember. James Hawthorne passed by her register, pausing briefly to adjust a display of seasonal items. "How are you holding up, Lindy?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. He'd been more attentive lately, ever since overhearing her quiet phone conversation with the dental office about payment plans. Something in his eyes told her he understood more than he let on. "I'm good, Mr. Hawthorne," she replied, the lie sitting uncomfortably in her throat. But what else could she say? That she'd spent her lunch break calculating how many more months it would take to save enough for just one college class? That she'd been surviving on instant noodles to help her father with his physical therapy copays? That sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she'd ever break free from the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. The afternoon wore on, each transaction a reminder of the modest dreams she'd had to set aside. A young man buying interview clothes reminded her of her own abandoned business degree. An elderly woman purchasing reading glasses brought back memories of quiet evenings spent studying with her mother, before illness had taken her away. Each beep of her scanner seemed to echo with the weight of postponed ambitions. David Smith stopped by near closing time, not to buy anything, but simply to share his usual words of encouragement. "You know, Lindy," he said, leaning against the counter, "I see something special in you. The way you treat people, it matters more than you might think." His words stirred something in her chest, a flutter of hope she'd been trying to suppress. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the linoleum floors, Lindy found herself reflecting on the path that had led her here. 3 years ago, this job was supposed to be temporary, just something to tide her over until she figured out her next step. Now, at 25, it had become her life, each day blending into the next in a monotonous rhythm of transactions and tight budgets. Yet despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to be bitter. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain. And dance she did, finding joy in the small moments, in helping elderly customers reach high shelves, in sneaking extra coupons to struggling students, in being the one bright spot in someone's otherwise difficult day. The evening news played quietly on the break room television, showing Mayor Diana Parker at another community event. Lindy watched absently as she ate her modest dinner, a slightly bruised apple and half a sandwich saved from lunch. The mayor spoke passionately about community initiatives and supporting local businesses, And for a moment, Lindy allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she too could make a real difference in her community. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Hope you're having a good day, sweetheart. Don't forget to take care of yourself too." And the message brought both warmth and worry. She knew he was struggling with his own bills, yet here he was, still trying to take care of her. She tucked the phone away, blinking back tears that threatened to fall. Maria Hernandez from the mayor's office had been in earlier, picking up supplies for some community event. She'd commented on Lindy's cheerful demeanor, saying how rare it was to find genuine kindness these days. Lindy had simply smiled, not knowing how to explain that sometimes kindness was all you had left to give when your pockets were empty. As closing time approached, Lindy began her end-of-shift routine, straightening displays and cleaning her register area. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to emphasize the tired lines around her eyes. Yet she maintained her warm smile, even as her feet ached and her mind raced with calculations about tomorrow's expenses. Little did she know that the universe was about to present her with a moment that would test everything she believed about kindness, generosity, and the power of small actions to change lives. As she prepared to close her register, the automatic doors slid open one last time, and with them came an opportunity that would challenge her in ways she never expected. Through the gleaming automatic doors of Value Mart stepped Rachel Torres, her tired eyes telling a story Lindy recognized all too well. Behind her trailed two children, 9-year-old Emma clutching a worn teddy bear, and 6-year-old Lucas, his untied shoelaces dragging on the freshly mopped floor. The fluorescent lights caught the shadows under Rachel's eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she guided her children toward Register 7. Lindy watched as they approached, noting the careful way Rachel examined price tags, the quiet whispers of maybe next time to her children's hopeful requests. Emma held onto her mother's sleeve, her dark eyes serious beyond her years, while Lucas bounced from foot to foot, his energy a stark contrast to his mother's exhaustion. "Good evening," Lindy greeted them warmly, her scanner ready. As Rachel began placing items on the conveyor belt, Lindy's trained eye cataloged the selections: store-brand pasta, the cheapest bread, marked-down vegetables approaching their sell-by date. Each item told a story of careful budgeting, of stretched resources, of a mother doing her best to keep her family fed. "Mommy, can we get this?" Lucas held up a small box of cookies, his eyes bright with hope. Rachel's face crumpled slightly, that particular expression Lindy had seen countless times, the pain of having to say no to a simple childhood pleasure. "Not today, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, her voice catching. "We need to stick to our list." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Lindy scanned each item, she noticed Rachel's fingers nervously twisting a crumpled receipt, her eyes fixed on the mounting total on the display. Emma stood close to her mother, one hand protectively holding her brother's, somehow understanding the weight of the moment despite her young age. The total flashed on the screen: $78.43. Lindy watched as Rachel reached into her purse, pulling out a worn wallet. Her fingers trembled as she counted out bills, ones and fives, carefully smoothed and recounted. The look in her eyes was one Lindy knew intimately, the silent prayer that the money would be enough, the mental calculation of what could be put back if it wasn't. "I'm sorry," Rachel's voice quivered as she counted the money a third time. "I thought I had enough. Could you?" She glanced at the small pile of groceries. "Could you void the vegetables? And maybe the bread?" Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as Lucas tugged at her sleeve, not understanding why they couldn't take everything home. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. Lindy felt the weight of her own $37.15 in her pocket, her emergency fund, the money she'd been saving for her father's medication. She thought of her own mother, gone too soon, and how she'd always taught her that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't always the easy thing. James Hawthorne was in the back office, counting the day's receipts. David Smith had left for the day. The store was quiet, save for the distant hum of freezer units and the soft sniffling of Emma, who seemed to be fighting back tears as she watched her mother's distress. "Ma'am," Lindy heard herself say, her hand already reaching for her wallet. "Please don't worry about it." The words came out before she could second-guess herself. "I'd like to help." She pulled out her carefully saved bills, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," she began, but Lindy was already counting out the difference. "Please," Lindy said softly, thinking of all the times she'd wished someone had been there to help her own family. "Let me do this." The store's security cameras silently recorded the moment. Lindy reaching across the counter to swipe her own card for the remaining balance, Rachel's eyes filling with tears, Emma's tight grip on her brother's hand loosening slightly. What those cameras couldn't capture was the way something shifted in the air, the way fate's wheels began turning in a new direction. "I don't know how to thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas, not fully understanding the situation but sensing its importance, stopped fidgeting. Emma looked at Lindy with eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. As Lindy helped bag their groceries, including the cookies Lucas had wanted, she noticed a small notebook falling from Rachel's purse. As she picked it up, she caught a glimpse of the contents: job applications, carefully written cover letters, a list of interviews. She handed it back to Rachel, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. "Things will get better," Lindy said softly. The words meant as much for herself as for Rachel. What she didn't know was that among the witnesses to this quiet act of kindness was Maria Hernandez, who had returned to the store for a forgotten item. The mayor's community outreach director stood silently by the magazine rack, watching the scene unfold with growing interest. As Rachel and her children left the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind them, Lindy felt a curious mixture of emotions. Her emergency fund was gone, but something else had taken its place, a warmth in her chest, a feeling that somehow this moment mattered more than she could understand. The rest of Lindy's shift passed in a blur of familiar motions, scanning items, counting change, offering warm smiles that now felt more genuine despite her depleted savings. As she helped the last few customers of the day, her mind kept drifting back to Rachel and her children. She wondered if Lucas had already opened those cookies, if Emma's serious eyes had softened a bit, if Rachel was feeling even a fraction less weight on her shoulders. James Hawthorne approached her register just before closing time, his keys jingling softly against his hip. "Everything all right, Lindy? You seem different tonight." His voice carried its usual warmth, but there was something else there too, a hint of concern, perhaps even curiosity. "I'm fine, Mr. Hawthorne," she replied, straightening the stack of sales flyers by her register. "Just thinking about how sometimes life has a way of showing us what really matters." She didn't mention her empty wallet or the bills waiting at home. Some choices, she realized, didn't need justification. As she began her closing routine, Maria Hernandez emerged from the office supplies aisle, her heels clicking purposefully against the linoleum floor. Lindy had noticed her earlier, but hadn't realized she'd stayed so long. The mayor's community outreach director approached Register 7 with an intensity that made Lindy's heart skip a beat. "I saw what you did," Maria said without preamble, her dark eyes studying Lindy with keen interest. "That family. You helped them without hesitation, even though—" She paused, glancing at Lindy's modest uniform, the worn shoes, the small name tag that had seen better days. Lindy felt her cheeks warm. "It wasn't anything special, really, just trying to help someone who needs it." She busied herself with organizing her drawer, hoping to avoid further scrutiny. But Maria wasn't finished. "You know, I've been working with Mayor Parker for 3 years now," Maria continued, leaning slightly against the counter. "We've been trying to launch a community support initiative, something that would help families like that one. But we've been missing something crucial. Someone who truly understands both sides of the equation." The evening cleaning crew had started their rounds, the smell of industrial cleaner mixing with the lingering scent of the store's generic air freshener. Through the windows, the parking lot lights created pools of yellow brightness in the growing darkness. Lindy listened as Maria spoke, her words painting a picture of possibility that seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. Mayor Parker has been looking for someone to help coordinate our new community outreach program, Maria explained, pulling out a business card from her leather portfolio. Someone who understands what it means to struggle, but also knows how to lift others up. Someone exactly like you. Lindy's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the card, its embossed letters catching the fluorescent light. The mayor's office seal seemed to gleam with official promise, a world away from her familiar register and scanner. I don't know what to say, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Say you'll come to the mayor's office tomorrow morning, Maria replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. 9 o'clock. We'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. She paused, then added more softly. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness reveal the biggest hearts, Lindy. And that's exactly what this city needs right now. James Hawthorne had been hovering nearby, pretending to adjust a display, but clearly listening. As Maria turned to leave, he approached Lindy with a proud smile. I always knew you were meant for more than Register 7, he said, patting her shoulder gently. You've got something special, Lindy. Something this world needs more of. The walk home that night felt different. The same cracked sidewalks she'd traveled hundreds of times seemed to lead somewhere new. The autumn air carried a hint of possibility, even as her practical mind raced with concerns. How would she afford appropriate clothes for a meeting at the mayor's office? What about her shift tomorrow? Could she really be qualified for whatever opportunity Maria had hinted at? In her small apartment, Lindy sat at her cramped kitchen table, Maria's business card propped against a nearly empty sugar bowl. Her father's medical bills were still scattered across the surface, their red past due, stamps a harsh reminder of reality. Yet somehow they didn't seem quite as daunting as before. She thought of Rachel's children, Emma's wise eyes, Lucas's hopeful smile. She thought of her own mother's words about kindness being a light that never dims. She thought of all the customers who had shared their stories with her over the years, their struggles and triumphs becoming part of her own story. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Hawthorne. Don't worry about your shift tomorrow, I'll cover it. This is your moment, Lindy. Take it. The simple message brought tears to her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed earlier. Sleep proved elusive that night, as Lindy stood before her modest closet, examining every piece of clothing she owned. Her nicest outfit, a navy blue dress she'd worn to her cousin's wedding 2 years ago, hung slightly faded, but still presentable. She pressed it carefully with her temperamental iron, her mother's voice echoing in her memory about how presentation matters less than presence, but first impressions matter all the same. The city looked different in the early morning light as Lindy made her way downtown. The imposing City Hall building, which she'd passed countless times without a second glance, now loomed before her like a mountain to be climbed. Her sensible shoes, polished to their best possible shine, clicked nervously against the marble floor of the lobby as she approached the security desk. I'm here to see Mayor Parker, she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. The security guard, an older man with kind eyes, checked his list and nodded. Ah, Ms. McFell Maria mentioned you'd be coming. Take the elevator to the 5th floor. Someone will meet you there. The elevator ride gave Lindy a moment to collect herself. Her reflection in the polished doors showed a young woman trying her best to look confident, despite the butterfly hurricane in her stomach. She'd practiced her introduction all morning, yet the words seemed to evaporate as the floor numbers ticked upward. Maria was waiting when the doors opened, her professional demeanor softened by a welcoming smile. Right on time, she said, leading Lindy down a hallway adorned with photographs of the city's history. Mayor Parker is excited to meet you. We've been discussing your potential role since last night. The mayor's office was both grander and more welcoming than Lindy had imagined. Warm, morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls lined with community awards and children's artwork. Mayor Diana Parker stood as they entered, her presence commanding yet approachable. "Lindy McFell," the mayor said warmly, extending her hand. "I've heard quite a story about you." She gestured to a comfortable chair, and Lindy sat, trying to keep her hands from trembling. "Maria tells me you demonstrated exactly the kind of compassion we've been looking for in our community outreach program." "I just did what anyone would do," Lindy began, but Mayor Parker shook her head. "That's exactly it. You did what everyone should do, but what too few actually would." The mayor leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Tell me, Lindy, what do you see when you look at our city? Not the buildings or the streets, but the people." The question caught Lindy off guard, but as she thought about her answer, she felt her nervousness begin to fade. "I see stories," she said slowly. "Every person who comes through my line at Value Mart has one. The elderly man bought cat food for his deceased wife's pet because he promised to take care of it. The college student counted pennies for ramen. A single mother like Rachel, trying to keep it all together." She found herself speaking with increasing passion about the daily struggles and triumphs she witnessed, about the importance of small kindnesses, about the way a community could lift each other up if given the chance. Mayor Parker listened intently, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances with Maria. "We're launching a new initiative," the mayor explained when Lindy finished. "The Riverside Heights Community Connection Program. It's designed to create a network of support for struggling families, to bridge the gap between government assistance and real human connection. What we've been missing is someone who truly understands both sides of that equation." Maria stepped forward, placing a folder on the desk. "We'd like to offer you a position as our community liaison officer. You'd be working directly with families in need, coordinating resources, and helping us understand how to better serve our community. The salary would be $45,000 a year, with full benefits." The number hit Lindy like a physical force. It was more than double what she made at Value Mart. Her mind raced to her father's medical bills, to her abandoned college dreams, to all the families she could help, but doubt crept in too. I don't have a college degree," she admitted, her voice small. "I had to drop out to help my father after his accident." Mayor Parker smiled warmly. "Education comes in many forms, Lindy. You have something more valuable: real-world experience and genuine compassion. Besides, the position includes a professional development program. You could complete your degree while working with us." As they discussed the details, Lindy felt as though she was floating in a dream. Yet every time she glanced out the window at the city spread below, she saw not just buildings and streets, but all the stories waiting to be changed, all the lives she could help improve. The walk back to Value Mart felt surreal, as if the city itself had transformed during her meeting at the mayor's office. The same streets she'd traveled thousands of times now seemed to pulse with new possibilities. The weight of the official employment packet in her bag reminded her that this wasn't just another dream she'd wake up from. James Hawthorne was waiting by Register 7 when she arrived, his face eager for news. The morning rush had slowed to a trickle, and a few regular customers lingered nearby, their curiosity poorly concealed behind magazine displays and shopping carts. "Well?" James asked, unable to contain himself any longer. "How did it go?" His genuine excitement for her potential success made Lindy's heart swell with gratitude. "They offered me a job," she said, the words still feeling foreign on her tongue. "Community liaison officer for their new outreach program. It's—" She paused, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the change before her. "It's everything I never dared to dream about." David Smith, who had been pretending to examine a display of seasonal items nearby, approached with a broad smile. "I knew it," he declared, his eyes twinkling. "The moment I saw you help that family yesterday, I told myself, that girl's got something special. Didn't I always say so?" Itrila. The news spread through the store like wildfire. Customers who had known Lindy for years stopped to offer congratulations. Mrs. Peterson hugged her tearfully, whispering, "You've always been too good for Register 7, dear." But Amapas and Tida Teoder twins made her a congratulations card out of a paper bag. decorated with wobbly hearts and glitter borrowed from the craft aisle. But amidst the celebration, reality began to sink in. Lindy's hands trembled slightly as she filled out the employment paperwork during her break. The salary figure still seemed impossible. More money than she'd ever earned, enough to help her father with his medical bills, maybe even restart her college education. Yet with opportunity came responsibility, and the weight of it pressed against her chest. "What if I'm not ready?" she confided to James as they sat in the break room. "What if I can't actually make a difference? It's one thing to help people at a register, but this..." She gestured helplessly at the official documents before her. James leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "You know, Lindy, I've watched you turn this register into more than just a place where people pay for groceries. You've made it a spot where people feel seen, heard, understood. That's exactly what this city needs." As her shift wound down, Lindy received an unexpected visitor. Rachel Torres approached Register 7, this time alone, her face brightened by a new hope. "I heard about your new job," she said, reaching across the counter to squeeze Lindy's hand. "Maria Hernandez told me when she delivered some information about community resources this morning. I needed to thank you again. Not just for yesterday, but for showing my children what kindness looks like." Rachel's eyes welled with tears as she continued. "Emma asked me last night if she could save half her allowance to help other people. Just like you did. You didn't just help us with groceries, Lindy. You showed us that even when things are hard, we can still make a difference." The impact of her simple act of kindness was beginning to ripple outward in ways Lindy never could have imagined. Maria had sent her a preliminary outline of the Community Connection Program, initiatives for food security, educational support, job training, and more. Looking at it now, Lindy could see faces she knew from Value Mart who could benefit from each program. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave her register for the last time, Lindy found herself moving slower than usual, taking in every detail. The slightly worn keys of her register, the familiar hum of the scanner, the scuffed floor where she'd stood for countless hours. It all held memories now tinged with both nostalgia and promise. "Your last customer of the day," James announced, placing a single rose on her conveyor belt. As she reached for it, he added softly, "You know, some people might see this as just a grocery store job, but you turned it into something more. You made it matter." Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only life-changing days seem to bring. Lindy stood before the mirror in her small bathroom, adjusting the collar of her new blouse, a gift from the Value Mart staff, presented to her during a tearful goodbye celebration the previous evening. The morning sun painted her apartment in shades of possibility, turning even the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table into something less daunting. Her first day at the mayor's office started with a flurry of introductions and orientations. Maria had arranged for her to have a small but bright office on the third floor, with windows overlooking the community park. "We thought you'd appreciate being able to see the people you'll be helping," Maria explained, helping her arrange her few personal items on the desk, including the rose from James, now dried and preserved as a reminder of where she'd started. The morning's agenda included a meeting with the entire Community Connection team. As Lindy sat at the conference table, surrounded by educated professionals in suits and blazers, she felt a moment of panic. But then she noticed something. As each team member introduced themselves, they spoke of the community with the same passion she felt, the same desire to make a difference. "Lindy," Mayor Parker said, entering the room with her characteristic energy, "why don't you tell the team about your experience with Rachel Torres? It's exactly the kind of situation our program needs to address." All eyes turned to her, and Lindy felt her throat tighten. But as she began to speak, something shifted. She wasn't just telling a story about helping someone pay for groceries. She was painting a picture of the daily struggles faced by so many in their community. She spoke about the dignity in asking for help, the courage it takes to keep going when everything seems stacked against you, the power of small acts of kindness to change lives. "That's exactly why we needed you here," the mayor said when she finished. "You don't just see statistics, you see stories. You understand that behind every application for assistance is a real person with real dreams and real potential. The afternoon brought her first official task, reviewing applications for the Emergency Assistance Program. Each folder contained a story that resonated with her own experiences. A single father struggling to pay utilities after losing his job, an elderly couple choosing between medication and food, a young student about to drop out of college due to financial hardship. Ms. McFell, a tentative voice interrupted her concentration. Looking up, she saw Emma Torres peering around her office door, followed by Rachel and Lucas. "Mom said we could come visit you at your new job." Rachel looked different already, standing straighter, smiling more easily. "We just finished meeting with the job training coordinator," she explained. "I start classes next week, medical billing and coding. I never thought it would be possible, but with the child care assistance program." Lindy felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Lucas explore her office with unbridled curiosity, touching everything within reach. Emma stood more reserved, but her eyes shone with something new. Hope, maybe, or understanding that things really could change. "You know," Rachel said softly, while the children were distracted by the view from the window. "When you helped us that day at Value Mart, I thought it was just about the groceries. I didn't realize you were showing us the way to a whole new life." As the afternoon sun slanted through her office windows, Lindy found herself working on a proposal, an idea that had been forming since her last day at Value Mart. The Register Project, she titled it, outlined a plan to partner with local grocery stores to identify and assist families in need, creating a network of support that would catch people before they reached crisis point. Maria stopped by as Lindy was putting the finishing touches on her proposal. "Already making waves, I see," she said, glancing at the document. "Mayor Parker was right about you. You're exactly what this community needed. Someone who understands that sometimes the smallest moments can lead to the biggest changes." The weeks that followed transformed not just Lindy's life, but the fabric of Riverside Heights itself. The Register Project, approved enthusiastically by Mayor Parker, began as a pilot program at Value Mart before spreading to other grocery stores across the city. James Hawthorne had eagerly volunteered to be the first store coordinator, training his cashiers to recognize signs of families in need and connect them with resources. One crisp autumn morning, Lindy stood at a podium in the City Hall's main conference room, presenting the project's first-month results to an audience that included local business owners, community leaders, and press representatives. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice remained steady. "In just 4 weeks, we've identified and assisted over 50 families," she reported, her heart swelling with pride. "But more importantly, we've created a network of compassion that extends beyond immediate financial aid. Every person helped becomes part of our community support system, often returning to volunteer or assist others in similar situations." David Smith, sitting in the front row, beamed like a proud father. He had expanded the program to include his hardware store, creating a home repair assistance program for families struggling with maintenance issues. "It's like you've started a kindness revolution," he told her after the presentation. "Everyone wants to be part of it." The local newspaper ran a feature story about the initiative, including a photograph of Lindy at her old register at Value Mart alongside one of her in her City Hall office. The contrast was striking, but what caught everyone's attention was her smile. Unchanged, genuine, still radiating the same warmth that had started it all. Rachel Torres had become one of the program's greatest success stories. Now certified in medical billing, she had secured a position at the local hospital with benefits that included child care assistance. Emma and Lucas would often visit Lindy's office after school, doing their homework at a small table she'd set up specifically for them. "Look what I got on my math test," Lucas exclaimed one afternoon, proudly displaying a paper marked with a bright red A. "Mom says it's because I don't have to worry about being hungry at school anymore, so I can concentrate better." Emma, more perceptive than ever, added thoughtfully, "And Mom smiles more now. She doesn't cry in her room when she thinks we're sleeping." The comment hit Lindy hard, reminding her of her own mother's struggles years ago. The Community Connection program expanded beyond its original scope, incorporating education initiatives, job training, and mental health support. Lindy's experience at Value Mart had taught her that poverty wasn't just about empty wallets. It was about empty spirits, broken dreams, and lost hope. One evening, as she prepared for a community outreach event, Mayor Parker stopped by her office. "You've exceeded every expectation we had," the mayor said, settling into a chair across from Lindy's desk. "But I have to ask, what drives you to keep pushing forward? Most people would have been satisfied with what we've already accomplished." Lindy glanced at the dried rose on her desk, then at the wall of success stories she'd begun collecting. Photographs of families helped, letters of gratitude, newspaper clippings documenting the program's growth. "When I was behind that register," she said slowly, "I could only help one person at a time. Now, through this program, every act of kindness multiplies. It's like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples keep spreading." The mayor nodded thoughtfully. "The City Council has approved funding to expand the program to neighboring communities. We'd like you to oversee the regional implementation. It would mean a significant promotion, more responsibility, and of course, a considerable salary increase." The offer took Lindy's breath away. She thought of her father, now receiving proper medical care thanks to her improved insurance coverage. She thought of her recently resumed college classes, paid for by the city's professional development program. She thought of all the lives still waiting to be changed. 6 months after that fateful day at Register 7, Lindy stood in the newly renovated community center, surrounded by the tangible results of her vision. The building, once a neglected municipal space, now buzzed with activity. The main hall had been transformed into a resource hub, where families could access everything from job training to childcare assistance. The walls, once drab and institutional, now displayed colorful murals painted by local artists, many of them program beneficiaries themselves. "Can you believe this all started with a grocery bill?" Rachel Torres asked, now standing confidently beside Lindy as the center's newly appointed program coordinator. Her children played nearby in the designated family area, a space specifically designed to make parents feel welcome rather than embarrassed about bringing their children to seek assistance. The transformation in Rachel's family had become a symbol of the program's success. Emma, once so serious and worried, now led a peer support group for other children from struggling families. Lucas had started a kindness club at his elementary school, inspired by the story of how Lindy had helped his family. Ms. McFell, a timid voice interrupted their conversation. A young woman stood nervously clutching a folder, another familiar scene from Value Mart, but now in a very different context. "I heard about your program from my cashier at Value Mart. She said you'd understand." Lindy smiled warmly, remembering countless similar moments from behind her register. "Come sit with us," she said, gesturing to the comfortable seating area she'd insisted on including in the center's design. Sometimes the hardest part is walking through the door. As they talked, Lindy noticed James Hawthorne giving a tour to a group of business owners from the neighboring city. The Register project had expanded to 15 stores across Riverside Heights, and other communities were taking notice. James had become an passionate advocate, training other store managers in implementing the program. "It's not just about identifying people in need," she overheard him explaining. "It's about creating a community where asking for help isn't shameful, where kindness is the default, not the exception." Later that afternoon, Mayor Parker arrived for their weekly meeting, but this time with an unusual request. "The governor's office called," she announced, settling into one of the center's purposefully welcoming chairs. "They want to use Riverside Heights as a model for a statewide program. They'd like you to consult on the implementation." Lindy's mind flashed back to that evening at Value Mart, counting out her last few dollars to help a struggling family. She remembered her own doubts, the weight of her empty wallet, the leap of faith that had seemed simultaneously reckless and absolutely necessary. We've already helped over 300 families in Riverside Heights, Mayor Parker continued. But think about what this could mean on a state level. Thousands of lives could be changed. She paused, watching Lindy's reaction carefully. Of course, it would mean a lot of travel, speaking engagements, training sessions. A commotion by the entrance drew their attention. David Smith was leading a group of local business owners through the center, each carrying boxes of supplies, donations for the center's emergency assistance program. Among them, Lindy recognized several faces from her days at Value Mart, people who had once been customers and were now partners in this growing movement of community support. You know what makes this program different, David was saying to his group? It's not just about handling emergencies. It's about preventing them. It's about creating a community where everyone looks out for each other, where kindness isn't just a nice idea but a practical solution to real problems. Maria Hernandez, who had been quietly observing from nearby, approached with a small package. "This arrived today," she said, handing it to Lindy. "From the National Community Development Association. They've selected our program for their annual Innovation in Social Services Award." 1 year to the day after Lindy had first helped Rachel Torres at Register 7, the Riverside Heights Community Connection Center hosted a celebration that filled its halls with laughter, tears, and stories of transformation. The event wasn't just about marking an anniversary. It was about celebrating how a single moment of kindness had sparked a revolution of compassion that continued to grow beyond anyone's expectations. Lindy stood at the podium, looking out over the gathered crowd. She saw James Hawthorne sitting with his team of newly trained community coordinators from various stores across the state. David Smith was there with a group of business owners who had implemented similar programs in their establishments. Maria Hernandez beamed proudly from her seat beside Mayor Parker, both of them having become more than colleagues. They were partners in a vision that had exceeded their wildest hopes. "A year ago," Lindy began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, "I was standing behind Register 7 at Value Mart counting out my last few dollars to help a family I'd never met before. I didn't know then that those few dollars would multiply into millions in community support. That one moment of connection would grow into a network touching thousands of lives." In the front row, Rachel Torres sat with Emma and Lucas, both children now thriving in school and involved in community service projects of their own. Emma had started a peer mentoring program for children from struggling families, while Lucas had become known as the kindness ambassador at his elementary school. "But what I've learned this past year," Lindy continued, "is that the most valuable currency isn't money. It's connection. It's the understanding that we're all part of each other's stories, that every small act of kindness has the potential to change not just one life, but an entire community." The celebration included the announcement of several new initiatives, the expansion of the Register Project to 50 more stores across the state, the launch of a scholarship program for children from assisted families, and the creation of a training institute to help other communities implement similar programs. As Lindy mingled with the guests after her speech, she found herself drawn to a quiet corner where a new display had been Insta-receipt, the one from that fateful transaction with Rachel, preserved as a reminder of how it all began. It was a simple glass case containing a Value Mart. It hung photographs documenting the program's growth, the first team meeting, the opening of the community center, families celebrating their successes, and countless moments of connection and hope. "You know," Mayor Parker said, joining her by the display, "when Maria first told me about what you did that day, I thought we were just hiring someone with good instincts for community outreach. I never imagined we were actually witnessing the birth of a movement." The mayor's words were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. A group of visitors from another state had arrived, eager to learn about implementing the program in their own community. Lindy watched as Rachel confidently stepped forward to greet them, remembering the nervous mother who had once counted pennies at her register. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Lindy found herself back at Value Mart. The store was closed, but James had given her a key. She stood before Register 7, now marked with a small plaque commemorating where the Community Connection program had begun. The register looked exactly the same, yet everything else had changed. She thought about the statistics they'd shared at the celebration, Hundreds of families helped, dozens of jobs secured, countless lives improved. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. They couldn't capture the restored dignity in a parent's eyes, the relief in a child's smile, the way hope could transform not just individuals, but entire communities. As she turned to leave, Lindy noticed a young cashier at another register, staying late to help a customer who was clearly struggling to afford their groceries. The cashier caught her eye and smiled, reaching for their own wallet. The cycle of kindness continued, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures could create the biggest changes. Walking home under the stars, Lindy remembered something her father had told her long ago. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. She'd learned that it was also about helping others find their rhythm, about creating shelter where there was none, about transforming storms into opportunities for growth and connection. The next morning would bring new challenges, new stories, new opportunities to help. But for now, Lindy savored the knowledge that somewhere in Riverside Heights, someone was receiving help because she had once dared to reach across a register with more than just change. She had reached out with hope, and that hope had multiplied beyond measure. 5 years after that life-changing evening at Register 7, Lindy McFell stood in the Grand Hall of the state capitol, preparing to address a nationwide conference on community development. The Community Connection program had grown far beyond the borders of Riverside Heights, touching lives across multiple states and inspiring similar initiatives around the country. The morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows, illuminating the faces of hundreds of community leaders who had gathered to learn about what the media had dubbed the Register Revolution. Among them sat Rachel Torres, now the executive director of the original Riverside Heights Center, and Emma, now a poised 14-year-old who had just won a National Youth Leadership Award for her work with struggling families. When people ask me about the secret to our program's success, Lindy began, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of experience, they're often surprised by my answer. It's not about the funding, though that's important. It's not about the systems we've developed, though they're crucial. It's about recognizing that every person behind every register on either side has a story worth hearing and a life worth supporting. The program had evolved in ways she could never have imagined. What started as a simple act of kindness had spawned a nationwide network of community support centers, each adapted to its local needs but all founded on the same principle, that small acts of compassion, when properly supported and amplified, could transform entire communities. James Hawthorne had retired from ValueMart, but continued to train retail staff across the country in identifying and supporting struggling families. The Register Project now operated in over 500 stores nationwide, and major retail chains were beginning to implement their own versions of the program. David Smith's hardware store initiative had grown into a comprehensive home repair and maintenance program, providing both emergency assistance and job training for community members. We don't just fix homes, he liked to say. We build foundations for better lives. Mayor Parker, now serving on a national community development board, often cited Riverside Heights as proof that social change didn't require massive government interventions. Sometimes it just needed someone willing to bridge the gap between human need and human compassion. Lucas, now 11, had recently been featured in a national magazine for creating a mobile app that helped kids connect with local community resources. I remembered how it felt when Ms. McFell helped us, he told the interviewer, and I wanted to make it easier for other kids to find help when they need it. The conference room buzzed with energy as Lindy shared the latest statistics. Over 10,000 families assisted, millions of dollars in community support generated, and countless lives improved. But more importantly, she shared the stories of the elderly veteran who now volunteered as a mentor in the job training program, of the single mother who had gone from receiving assistance to running her own successful business, of the countless small moments of connection that had created lasting change. What we've learned, she continued, is that poverty isn't just about lack of money. It's about lack of connection. When we bridge that gap, when we create networks of support and understanding, We don't just help people survive their current crisis. We help them build the resilience and resources to prevent the next one. Maria Hernandez, now heading a national initiative to replicate the program in other cities, smiled from her seat in the front row. She remembered that evening in Value Mart when she had witnessed a simple act of kindness that would reshape her understanding of community development. The conference included workshops led by program graduates, people who had once been recipients of assistance and were now leaders in their communities. Rachel Torres led a session on transforming emergency assistance into long-term empowerment. Emma and Lucas ran a youth panel involving young people in community support initiatives. As Lindy concluded her speech, she shared a photograph on the massive screen behind her, a simple shot of Register 7, now preserved in a small museum display at the original Value Mart. "This is where our story began," she said, "but it's not where it ends." Every day in checkout lines in communities across the country, people are learning that the smallest gesture of kindness can be the first step toward the biggest changes. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Lindy. It was for every person who had dared to reach across a register with more than just money. For every community that had embraced the idea that helping others wasn't just a noble goal, but a practical solution to social challenges. The evening after the conference, Lindy found herself back in Riverside Heights, walking the familiar streets that had witnessed the beginning of her journey. The city has changed in the past 5 years, not just in its appearance but in its spirit. The Community Connection Center, once a single building, had spawned satellite locations throughout the city, each one a beacon of hope and transformation. As she approached the original Value Mart, now designated as a historical landmark in the story of social change, she noticed a group of students gathered around Register 7. They were from the newly established Community Development Program at the local university, a curriculum that had been inspired by the success of the Register Project and was now being replicated at colleges across the country. "Ms. McFell," called out a familiar voice. Emma Torres, now preparing for college herself, hurried over with a thick binder in her arms. "I wanted to show you my thesis proposal. It's about expanding the youth mentorship program nationally." Her eyes sparkled with the same determination Lindy had once seen in Rachel's eyes, but now it was fueled by hope rather than desperation. Inside the store, James Hawthorne's successor was training a new cashier using the now standardized Community Connection protocol that had become part of every employee's orientation. "Remember," she overheard him say, "you're not just operating a register, you're maintaining a vital community connection point." The store's community board, once filled with lost pet flyers and yard sale announcements, now displayed success stories from the program alongside resources for assistance. A digital kiosk nearby offered direct connections to various community services, an innovation suggested by Lucas during one of his technology workshops. Mayor Parker, who had delayed her retirement to see through the program's national expansion, joined Lindy at the store. "Sometimes I come here just to remember," she confided, "to watch people connecting, helping each other, carrying on what you started without even knowing they're part of something bigger." Together, they walked to the small plaza outside, where a new monument had been installed, a bronze casting of 2 hands reaching across a register, symbolizing the bridge between need and support. The plaque beneath it read, "Where kindness became revolution, the birthplace of the Community Connection movement." Rachel Torres arrived, now dressed in a business suit that reflected her role as executive director. "The governor just approved funding for 10 new centers across the state," she announced proudly. "And the federal pilot program launches next month." She paused, looking at the monument. "Sometimes I still can't believe it all started because you helped me buy groceries." The sun was setting over Riverside Heights, painting the sky in the same colors it had on that fateful evening years ago. The next morning would bring new challenges, meetings about international adaptations of the program, consultations with government agencies, training sessions for community leaders. But tonight, watching the lights come on in homes across Riverside Heights, Lindy knew that somewhere in countless communities, someone was reaching out with kindness, someone was accepting help with dignity, and someone was learning that the smallest gesture could spark the biggest change. "You know what I've learned?" She said to Mayor Parker, who had lingered to share this moment. "It's not just about helping people in need. It's about creating a world where helping each other is as natural as breathing, where kindness isn't exceptional. It's expected." The mayor smiled, gesturing to the busy community center across the street. "And that's exactly what you've built here. Not just a program, not just a movement, but a new way of being human together." As they walked back through the city they had helped transform, Lindy thought about that young cashier she had once been, counting out her last few dollars at Register 7. She couldn't have imagined then that those dollars would multiply into millions, that one act of kindness would spark a national movement, that a simple choice to help would reshape not just her life, but countless others. The story of Register 7 would be told for generations to come, not just as a tale of personal transformation, but as proof that sometimes the biggest revolutions start with the smallest gestures, that true change comes not from grand plans, but from simple moments of human connection, and that in the end, we all have the power to turn ordinary moments into extraordinary movements of hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.